The culmination of weeks of fighting, vast consumption of alcohol, and a general lack of communication skills brought upon the last day Harry spent with his father. His dad had finally decided to leave. Harry's mother was suffering from acute schizophrenia as well as being a hopeless alcoholic, which Harry's father was as well, so it wasn't much of a problem. She also had a nasty cough syrup addiction, some of the best heroin-laced medicine the 1920s had to offer. She would scream at his father for hours, not making any sense, and fly off for the smallest reason. It was too much for him to handle, especially since he was a complete idiot. He took Harry for a walk upon the path that ran along the ravine behind their house on the edge of town, to tell him something to ease the pain when Harry found out he was leaving for good. He still didn't know what. They came upon a clearing beside the small ravine that had a creek running along the bottom. In the middle of the clearing were 6 rocks about the size of grapefruits in a circle like a small campfire. This gave Harry's father what he thought was a great idea. He turned to his son, looked him in the eye, and firmly clasped his shoulder with his strong but careless hand. "Son," he said, pausing to look gravely into Harry's eyes, while Harry stared up at his father with admiration and expectation that comes when you know someone you love and respect is going to say something really important, and preparing himself to absorb whatever his father said fully and completely. "You see those rocks over there?" Harry looked over and then back at his father and nodded his head. "Those rocks will always be there, son, and no matter how messed up your life is, or how much your mother screams at you, or whatever happens, those rocks will be there. And as long as they're there, you'll be okay." Harry's father looked up into his pickled head to make sure that what he had said made sense to himself at least, while Harry's brow furrowed in innocent confusion, waiting for his father to say the punchline to these wise words, because he did not understand and was getting very scared. After 3 or 4 minutes, Harry's father nodded to himself that it was suitable, and completely ignoring the lost look on Harry's face, blurted, "I am leaving you and your mother today, and I am never coming back, son. You're the man of the house now." He almost told Harry he loved him, and almost gave him a hug, but settled for a firmer grip on his shoulder, and then walked out of his son's life forever, not even looking back once. Harry looked back and forth from his father walking away to the rocks with his mouth hanging open in shock and a sort of comatose look on his face. Harry was 8 years old. Harry was 8 years old. Harry was 8 years old. Harry was 8 years old.
What's rock on? With you, he keeps staring down. It's no use. My eyes what's wrong with you.
After Harry's father left, his mother just got worse. She intensified her anger and focused most of it on men, namely Harry, and with cold, calculated precision, she stripped Harry of any manhood that could have formed, and she kept him small and weak and completely under her power. She would lecture him for hours with her insane prattle, beat him, burn him, deplete him. Harry didn't masturbate. His mother wouldn't let him. With no backbone in the shabby clothes his mother provided him with effectively put Harry on the low pecking order at school, and he became a quick and easy way for the other kids to boost their self-esteem by beating the crap out of Harry ritually. Harry had no friends. The only thing that prevented Harry from a complete breakdown were the rocks his father had pointed out to him. He took what his father said that day very seriously, almost obsessively. So whenever his mother had finished one of her day-long tirades, usually ending only because she's too drunk and high to remain conscious, or when the kids at school have chased him all day and then kicked him so hard in the groin and stomach that he peed blood for a week, he would run out to his rocks as soon as there was an opportunity and check and make sure they were all there. If he saw that they were okay, he would feel better. It was the only thing that could calm his crying, choking fits of hysteria that resulted from his unhealthy surroundings. The rocks became the closest thing to a hug in Harry's life than anything else. His father had actually been able to provide Harry with something to help him in his absence. Without those rocks, Harry would not have made it this far. Without those rocks, Harry would not have made it this far. Without those rocks, Harry would not have made it this far. Eventually, one of the rocks had been moved. It was really late one chilled spring evening. Harry was sitting a few feet away from the rocks, staring at them and calming himself after an especially long and chemically driven lecture by his mother, when he heard some voices coming down the path. He immediately hid himself in the bushes nearby and waited for them to pass. It was a couple who had gone for a walk on the outside of town. They were completely drunk, which is probably why they were up for a walk, since this was during Prohibition, and they didn't want to be seen. They were laughing and kissing and basically having a great time that Harry felt he never would. Just as the bitterness and resentment was starting to build up in Harry, the lady walked over to Harry's rocks, picked up the smallest one, oh, it had to be the smallest one, and gracefully hucked it over the edge of the ravine with an elegant silence. Followed after what seemed like an hour, a small splashing sound that echoed and reverberated up the walls of the ravine. The couple stood there holding each other and gazing at the moon and enjoying themselves, while Harry crouched there, holding his breath and staring at the empty space in the dark sky where she had thrown his rock with tears streaming down his eyes. It took Harry 8 to 9 hours to find his rock. He knew it was in the riverbed from the splash, so he started where he thought it might have landed according to possible trajectory, even trying a few test rocks, hoping to find it right away, but he eventually had to start a sophisticated search of the riverbed, square foot by square foot. A surveyor would have been impressed by Harry's methods. It was much easier when the sun came out, but he still had to do the riverbed over 6.5 times before finally finding it. He was completely soaked and chilled to the bone. Spring had just started, so the evenings and mornings were still pretty cold. His pants and shoes were completely wrecked, and his back felt like someone had hit it in the middle with a hammer. He groggily climbed up the ravine to the clearing and ever so gently placed the rock back into the depression in the ground, instantly easing Harry's frantic mind. He euphorically limped home on his sore, wretched feet. He had a lot of trouble using his keys in the sticky lock in the back door. The edge of the key was biting into his waterlogged thumb. As soon as he opened the door, he sopped his way to the washroom to clean and disinfect the cuts he had received scouring the riverbed. And just as Harry was lathering the soap in his hands, he noticed his mother's dead eyes staring up at him from underneath the water in the tub. Dead eyes staring up at him from underneath the water in the tub. Dead eyes staring up at him from underneath the water in the tub. Dead eyes staring up at him from underneath the water in the tub. Harry's mother owned the house and actually had a nice sum of money stuffed away in places that crazy people usually hid their money, so Harry was all right financially as long as he lived simply, which he did. Harry could have gone one of two ways at this stage in his mental decay: really bad or really super clean. Harry unconsciously decided to go super clean. Straight and narrow, always polite, didn't smoke or drink, always went to church and paid tithing with some extra. He got a job at the local shovel factory as an accountant. He was a small, quiet man. The ladies in his office at work giggled at him behind his back, but mothered his innocence. Harry's house was spotless, and all his food was alphabetically organized. His hands were always clean. Harry was not crazy. He made sure of that. Every morning before work, Harry would go out for a jog along the path that ran along the ravine behind his house. He would always stop at a certain spot beside a clearing. You couldn't go into the clearing. Someone had smashed old vodka bottles everywhere. He would do this to either retie his perfectly tied shoes, or clean his spotless glasses, or whatever, to allow his subconscious mind a moment to check and make sure the rocks were still there. Harry's insanity was completely hidden to everyone, even Harry. One morning, however, Harry slept in. He had never done this before, and he was quite panicked. He had had a cold the evening before, so he took some of his mother's tonic from a leftover bottle. There were still 7 unopened bottles. The tonic itself was a very powerful opiate that you could still buy at the local pharmacy. There was enough in one bottle to kill a small child, so Harry slept very well that night, thus making him sleep in. Out the door he rushed, with toothbrush in mouth and breakfast in hand. 14 hours later, Harry returned home from work. There was a mistake, and all the checks had to be redone that night, by hand, by Harry. He was dead tired with the cold still affecting him, and he fell asleep at the kitchen table for a few hours until he awoke in a disturbed state, with an unresisting urge to go for a walk upon the path that ran along the ravine behind his house. There was no escaping his need to see the rocks. While Harry was conveniently adjusting his belt so he could check his rocks, he heard voices coming down the path and dove into the bushes with a dreadful case of déjà vu. This is where Chelsea Monroe enters Harry's life. Chelsea was a sweet young city girl who married a coal miner and became pregnant. 5 months later, he died in a cave-in, and she had a miscarriage partway through the pregnancy due to complications. Both Chelsea's parents were dead, and her husband's parents hated her because of the difference in religious background. Without finding work, Chelsea eventually turned to prostitution and drugs for escape. She did everything and had everything done to her, and it was all just too much. This particular evening, Chelsea was very drunk and very high and very suicidal. She was getting loaded with some people she hardly knew, a common occurrence. They had driven out to see some Civil War monument on a drug-induced whim that was actually in another town altogether. One of her friends was in the illegal booze business during Prohibition, so he could afford the luxury of an automobile and crazy trips like this. When Chelsea saw the clearing in the edge of the ravine, she knew it was a perfect place to kill herself, so she decided to do just that. She started walking away from her friends and towards the edge of the ravine. Her friends kept walking and didn't notice she was gone for another 20 minutes. Harry froze solid with fear. The rocks were in a direct path between Chelsea and the edge, and he was sure she was going to pick up one of the rocks and throw it like the other girl. And the bottles he had smashed weren't stopping Chelsea, so high and so set on death that she didn't even notice that she was slicing her feet to ribbons. When she was 3 feet away from the rocks, Harry snapped and ran towards her, and just as her foot barely touched the first rock, Harry screamed out, "No!" She turned toward him and witnessed the most pained look she had ever seen painted across Harry's face. His pleading eyes brought her out of her death trance. She had confused Harry's distress for his rocks, for her, and it touched Chelsea deeper than any John ever could. Now, not so set on dying, Chelsea begins to feel the cuts on her feet and starts to swoon. Harry sees this and catches her before she slices her pretty body on the broken glass below. She passes out with Harry's confused and concerned face imprinted on her mind. He wasn't sure what to do, so he carried her home, cleaned and bandaged her feet, and put her in his mother's bed. In the morning, Chelsea fell completely in love with clean, harmless Harry, especially after the bastard she had just dealt with. She quit drinking and drugs, cut off all her old connections, and they were married within 3 months. For the first time in Harry's life, he felt normal and quit some of his strange habits, but the tide of the rocks was stronger than ever now. But the tide of the rocks was stronger than ever now. But the tide of the rocks was stronger than ever now.
It won't take too long, yeah, now. For us now to undress. It won't take too long, yeah, now. For the now, the first kiss. And I won't lie, good now, to you I won't lie. I will pretend, yeah, now, just to get closer to you now, in the end. And I know now you'll take your time. And I know despite everything, it feels so right.
Harry was really bothered by the birth of their son, for the simple fact that it was a boy. He was so put off by his own gender from the endless ranting of his mother and his father leaving that he was completely disgusted by men and himself. This unhealthy viewpoint completely stood in the way of Harry bonding with his child at all and could barely even touch him. Chelsea herself was very sick after the birth. She had to get a C-section due to her rickets from her young, impoverished city life. The wound did not heal well at all and left a nasty scar. Chelsea was put on opiate-based painkillers for a while, which caused her a lot of distress from her past addictions, which were still pretty fresh. When she was cut off from the painkillers finally, it was rough around the house while her emotions went rampant, and even sweet Chelsea would snap at Harry, who would quietly take the mental abuse. All that cleared up when Chelsea discovered the 7 unopened bottles of tonic stashed in the cellar in the basement. She was well familiar with that very tonic, having used it herself when she didn't have much money in the city and still wanted to get messed up. She dove through the bottles and everything went calm and sweet in the house for a while. When Chelsea ran out, it was a little hectic for one morning, but she quickly tracked down the same store Harry's mother had got it from. The grocer still had a good number of bottles left, so Chelsea was quite relieved. She bought 4 bottles and then quickly went home. As soon as she got in the door and the baby in his high chair, she cracked a bottle and then drank it all in a craving frenzy. She then proceeded to open the second bottle and got through a few mouthfuls before the effect of the first bottle hit her. She danced pirouettes over to the couch with the baby laughing and plopped down wrapped in a warm, euphoric blanket. Chelsea passed out smiling and hugging herself, leaving the unopened bottle on the counter within the baby's reach. The baby had gotten 2/3 of the way through the bottle of sweet purple tonic before going into a coma and dying within 3 hours. Harry was sitting at work, contemplating his life, and his mind had just reached what could have been a very monumental and positive change in him and in his relationship with his son. He had come to realize the effects of the mental abuse from his mother on his mind, and that his revulsion of his son was silly. A warm glow started to grow inside Harry, and he nearly cried there right at his desk with the sudden realization of what a beautiful baby boy and wonderful wife he had at home, and how lucky he was. Harry asked to leave work early, which the boss allowed, chuckling to himself at the urgency of the still fresh newlywed. Harry raced home from work, taking the long way like he always did after work. It brought him home by means of the path that ran along the ravine behind their house. Harry still checked his rocks every day without fail, and he still didn't really know he was doing it either. He paused by the rocks and was in the middle of fixing his already perfect tie when his eyes noticed something different about the rocks. Harry immediately forgot the newfound love for his son and snapped back into his old mode of mind and went straight towards the rocks with an edge of panic, stepping on the safe spots with no glass he had left so he could still get up close to the rocks. As soon as he got closer, he could see the crack along the top of one of the larger rocks. It was caused naturally by the constant shrinking and swelling from temperature changes. Harry was petrified. He ran his finger along the edge of the crack, and the top of the rock fell, almost jumped off the rock from Harry's gentle touch. Harry shrieked quietly to himself and frantically replaced the broken piece on top of the rock. He looked around with panic at the beautiful forest surroundings, waiting for something to happen. After the silence stretched for an hour, Harry began to relax and took his hand off the top of the rock and slowly stood up. He remained there for quite some time, staring at the rocks with a mistrusting and challenging look on his face. When it started to get noticeably darker, he remembered his wife and his son and shuffled home with his hands in his pockets, looking over his shoulder at the rocks until he couldn't see them anymore. For the first time in a long time, Harry consciously thought about himself and the rocks. As soon as he walked in the door and saw his son in his high chair from behind, Harry forgot about the rocks, and the joy he felt earlier today towards his son came back tenfold, and he leapt to his son and embraced him for the first time with no fear and with love. He noticed quickly that his son's body was cold and sticky. Harry calmly stood back and, showing no emotion at all, spun the high chair around. The purple stain of tonic all down the front of the baby's clothes complemented the dead blue face. Harry stared at his son for 30 seconds, then at the bottles of tonic for a while. He walked into the living room and stared at his wife stretched out on the couch with a look of pure contentment and joy on her face. She woke up smiling to Harry staring down at her. He sat down on the couch beside her and, showing no emotion at all, strangled her to death. Harry was lost forever that day. Harry was lost forever that day. Harry was lost forever that day.
Mention tell me to my face. Want to have, want to say that. Chelsea, sweetie, I'm home,
he called out.
Hang your cane on the hook, dear,
she replied back from the living room.
Oh, yeah,
Harry absent-mindedly said, and obediently hung his cane on its special hook.
How was our baby girl today?
He said, walking into the living room.
I think her front teeth are coming in finally, Harry. She's been fussing all day and would barely eat.
Chelsea responded with all the concern and love that a mother would naturally show.
You said that before. A few times. And they never have yet.
Harry responded with solid fatherly care.
We'll see, I guess,
she said, glancing over at the crib in the corner of the living room.
Make sure you pick up a teething ring tomorrow, okay? Just in case. I don't think she's old enough yet,
he said, bending over to kiss her forehead. If someone were to look in the window, which they couldn't, because Harry had them all glazed a long time ago, they would see an old man kissing the forehead of a mummified corpse. Harry had completely crossed the lines of sanity, and his mind set up this pretend world for him to live in, complete with the embalmed and preserved bodies of his dead wife and child. He didn't see the curled brown flesh of his wife's dead face. He saw the sweet young face of Chelsea as he remembered her. He had lived this way ever since the rocks were last disturbed. He'd had to hide the bodies in the cellar once in a while when repairmen and unavoidable company would come calling. There had been a few close calls, but Harry's subconscious is very cunning and thinks of all the angles ahead of time, so there's never been an accident. He even changed the gender of his child in his mind to ease the distress of having a son. Harry was not crazy. He made sure of that. After adoring his beautiful wife for a few moments, he picked her up, chair and all. He had discovered that it was just easier to keep the body in the chair at all times after her left leg accidentally broke off 4 years ago, and carried her down into the cellar, and then returned upstairs and brought down his baby girl. Harry was getting cable installed into his home, and the cable guy was coming either tonight or tomorrow morning. Better safe than sorry. He had designed the hatch on the cellar to hide itself into the floor quite efficiently so he could safely hide the bodies. It was pretty heavy, and he'd been having trouble with the hinges sticking. He couldn't even open it all the way anymore, and had to keep it propped open with a stick. It was quite a trick actually getting the bodies in there. After, Harry went upstairs, started dinner, and then tidied the house. After dinner, Harry decided to go for a walk upon the path that ran along the ravine behind their house, and without even noticing it, grabbed his small bottle of all-purpose glue. It was calm and still that evening, and the sky was perfectly cloudless, a great night for stargazing, which was the exact plan of a local 14-year-old Pete who had just received a telescope for his birthday. He had lugged it on his backpack to the edge of town and was perched atop the ravine opposite a large clearing. It wasn't dark yet, so he was busying himself by scanning the area around him and getting used to focusing the telescope. He picked a small group of rocks in the middle of a clearing on the other side of the ravine. It was a lower elevation, and he wanted to see how close he could zoom in. He was a smart kid, and he figured it out quick and could actually make out the outline of glue on the larger rock. He was studying the rock for some time with one eye to the telescope, and his mouth gaping open in wonder of the power of his new toy, when out of nowhere an old grizzled hand came into view. He looked away from the eyepiece and saw Harry crouched intently beside his rocks. Pete looked back through the eyepiece, intrigued by this strange old man. Pete saw Harry adding glue to the crack on the edge of the larger rock, and this just piqued his curiosity even more. When Harry was done, he stood up, stared at the rocks for 10 minutes with a sad, fixed gaze, and then shuffled home. Pete had already decided to go and check out the rocks before Harry was even out of sight. He hid his telescope under a bush and climbed down the ravine. He took off his shoes, waded across the creek, and climbed up the other side. He hid for a while, convinced the old man would come back at any time. After a few minutes, Pete mustered his courage and crawled out towards the rocks, staying low and out of sight. He immediately came upon the broken glass Harry had thrown down, but then remembering where Harry walked, he found the safe spots and reached the rocks in a few more minutes. Approaching the rocks, he realized that there was a powerful presence to their silence. The crack along the top was what really made him curious, not to mention Harry regluing it. He slowly reached out his hand towards the biggest rock with the crack in it, completely tense and expecting Harry any second to come out of the woods screaming at him. His fingers extended in preparation to pick up the rock.
Harry, come downstairs!
He heard Chelsea holler in a different voice, a voice he'd never heard before. It had an edge to it. He could hear his daughter screaming.
Yes, dear.
He called back, locking the door and deadbolt behind him, and headed downstairs. Harry scooched down the hatch, noting that he didn't like the look of the stick holding up the door, and to fix it right after talking to Chelsea. As soon as he got to the bottom of the ladder, he reached for the book of matches he kept down there, grabbed one of the 2 matches left and lit a candle, and then went over to the baby and tried to soothe her. Chelsea was there in her chair in the corner, looking as beautiful as ever, with a calm and admiring face.
You're a fucking rat bastard, Harry.
She said with a smile and fawn-like eyes.
What?
Harry stammered. She had never spoken like this, and her voice was different. It scared him.
You heard me, you loser. Jesus fucking Christ, Harry, why are you such pathetic shit?
She screamed at him, but still with her calm, sweet face. The baby started to scream louder.
What's wrong with you?
He whimpered, stepping backwards towards the ladder.
Nothing that you and that limp, shriveled worm of a dick could fix.
She said, spitting in coarse, but looking like a giggling schoolgirl.
You're not even a man. You're just a crazy, diseased fuck.
The baby started a tortured, wretched, screaming cry.
I'm not crazy.
Harry said quietly, reaching his hand towards the rung on the ladder. It was at this precise moment that Pete's hand grasped the rock and pulled it out of its place in the ground. The moment he had it out, complete silence surrounded him. The birds stopped chirping, the wind stopped whispering, nothing. As soon as the rock was moved, Harry's perspective shifted, and the safe world he had created for himself and lived in for 40 years shattered in his mind, and his young, beautiful wife melted into a withered corpse. His daughter morphed into a black, puckered mound of skin dressed in pink baby clothes. But still, Chelsea screamed foul, filthy, and vicious threats and insults at Harry, and the baby screamed louder and louder. Harry clutched his head and screamed, just as the stick holding up the hatch gave out and the door slammed shut, with the lock on top somehow mysteriously locking itself, trapping Harry in the cellar with the enraged ghost of his wife, screaming and torturing him until fatigue finally kills Harry 3 days later.